Time for your regular dose of American democracy. The U.S. convened the second so-called Summit for Democracy on Wednesday and Thursday. Unlike the last summit, of which the U.S. was the only host, 4 co-hosts from 4 continents were tapped this year, namely Zambia, Costa Rica, the Republic of Korea, and the Netherlands. President Biden, or Mr. Biden, promised to host the summit whilst running for president, and the summit is seen as an attempt to strengthen America's alliances and reaffirm its leadership. Now, 120 countries and regions were invited, but according to U.S. Department of State, only 100 so-called partner governments were represented. Is the U.S. trying to divide the world according to values? China wasn't invited to the meeting, but was China really absent? What does the world think of this meeting? I'm pleased to be joined from Stockholm, Sweden by Hussein Askary, strategic analyst at the Schiller Institute, a German-based political and economic think tank, and from New York by Margaret Kimberley, executive editor at the media outlet Black Agenda Report. The warmest welcome to both of you. So Mr. Biden said during his speech at the plenary of the summit that strengthening democracy is a subject about which he is somewhat passionate, and he believes it is the defining challenge of this age. Mr. Askary, let me go to you first. What exactly is the intention and goal of the United States behind hosting this summit? Is it really about promoting democracy, or about assembling a kind of pro-U.S. alliance using ideology as a handle?
Thank you, Mr. Liu-Shin, for inviting me. Yes, I mean, as you said in the introduction, that the purpose of this summit is to divide the world into our group and their, between us and them, between the so-called we, the democratic, and the others who are not democratic. And this is actually has turned into an embarrassment. I mean, the summit, many people have called this the summit of hypocrisy. And I think it's a bit of an understatement, because the world has noticed that democracy with Anglo-American characteristics is something which is now carried under the wings of B-52 bombers, Predator drones, and on depleted uranium-clad shells. And it's shrouded with harsh economic sanctions. So if the bombs don't kill you, we will starve you to death. This is the message to the world from the Anglo-American democracy.
Okay, Mr. Askary, I'm sorry, the audio quality seems to be dissatisfactory right now. Let's try to re-establish the line, and I'll give you the opportunity to elaborate your point. But let me go to Ms. Kimberley here. What do you think of this summit being held by countries that are that have a track record of grafting their political system onto others by force? And Mr. Biden talks about democracies becoming stronger and stronger, and autocracies becoming weaker and weaker, of course, or according to American standard. Is America becoming stronger and stronger as a democracy?
Well, America is not a democracy. First of all, it's a plutocracy, it's an oligarchy, it's a corporatist state, but it's not a democracy. We have elections, but they're pretty much shams. I won't go into a lot of detail about that, but this idea that the U.S. lives up to its claim of being a democracy, that is to say a government that represents its people, is just not true. So these summits are exercises, frankly, in war propaganda, where the United States invites countries it's friendly with, that is to say those countries that do what it wants, and calls them democracies, and any country that doesn't do what the United States wants, that asserts its independence or its sovereignty or dares to differ with the U.S. is labeled an authoritarian state or an autocracy. So the entire premise of this is very cynical, and it is a summit of hypocrisy. So these are public relations stunts, but they have nothing to do with democracy, something that the U.S. frankly knows nothing about.
Well, China obviously does not belong to the democracy camp, according to the Biden administration, according to American standards. What do you think is the potential consequence of this trend amplifying? I mean, dividing the world along ideological lines. Are we really going to see the danger of a new Cold War? Do you think such events would really promote unity and cooperation when we are faced with so many crises and challenges? Ms. Kimberley, once again.
Well, we need cooperation. The only solution for the world is peaceful coexistence among nations, rather than the United States claiming this right to control the rest of the world. We're well into a Cold War. Actually, places like Ukraine, another proxy war, is a hot war, in fact. But we see China exerting its influence in the world, which I think is a good thing. It is not a good thing for the U.S. to believe it's the only one that can control events. And we see nations coming together, nations uniting in order to get away from U.S. aggression, in order to get away from U.S. dollar dominance, in order to get away from sanctions and all of the disruptions that the United States has caused in recent decades.
But some people would argue, Ms. Kimberley, that democracies are important, and it is also important for China and all the other countries that are struggling to improve their governance, that are struggling to become more developed. What is the right venue then? What is the right ways to promote dialogues on democratic governance and to improve democracy across the board in all different locations and under different political systems?
Well, the United States needs to act like the democracy it claims to be. Then it can be a model for the rest of the world instead of this bully that other countries want to flee. There are many examples of democracies around the world, countries that strive. They may not always succeed, that strive to truly represent their people and to do what's in their interests, rather than to be phony about allegedly representing one's people. The people of this country are not represented in Washington. Corporations are, the military-industrial complexes, but the people are not represented. So the U.S. must start at home. And then any efforts to spread democracy around the world will be honest. But first, the U.S. has to accept that it must peacefully coexist with other nations.
Another thing about democracy is that it seems a lot of people, including ordinary people, refuse to acknowledge that there are other ways of government that may be democratic in essence, but not democratic in appearance, according to the Western standard. For instance, this whole election thing that the United States is so entrenched, resolute about. If you don't have election, you don't have democracy. How do you look at that kind of reluctance to be open-minded about the ways how governance can be carried out?
Well, the United States has to stop acting as though it's exceptional, that it's special in a good way, and just accept that there are different ways of doing things around the world. Rather than, and our elections are a sham. They're all about money. Candidates who raise more money tend to win. People may claim that they are going to represent the people, but they go to Washington and represent defense contractors and big pharma and other institutions that don't benefit the people. So just having elections alone is not proof of democracy, because the plutocrats like elections, the oligarchs like elections. They give the appearance that all is well when they are the ones firmly in control. So we have to talk about what elections are really like in this country, who they really represent, and whether the outcomes benefit the people.
Now, last time the summit set up a presidential initiative for democratic renewal, Ms. Kimberley, with 400 million US dollars committed to the cause. And this time it's an additional 690 million US dollars to be committed to the initiative. And the money will be spent, quote unquote, shoring up governance, support for media freedom, fight international corruption, stand with democracy and democratic reformers, promote technology that advances democracy, and defend elections. So given the track record of the United States in meddling in other countries' affairs under the pretext of democracy, what can the world expect when more money, even a total of 9 billion US dollars, is committed to promoting democracy around the world?
Well, it's money that's going to be used for color revolutions. It's money that's going to be used to undermine governments that don't do what the U.S. Wants it to do. It's going to be the usual. And it's just very insidious that this interference in the affairs of other countries, these efforts to enhance U.S. hegemony, are clothed in talk of democracy. You know, you have to want democracy for the rest of the world. So for one state to claim that it can pick leaders for other countries, decide who's in, who's out, who's up, who's down, is very much undemocratic. So I'm afraid that all this money is going to be used the way it has been in the past.
Yeah, the final question goes to Mr. Askary. I'm sorry that time is very limited, but I will give this final question to you. Zambian president published an article on Western media saying that you can't eat democracy. In the article, he says human rights may sustain the spirit but not the body. Particularly in young democracies like mine, governments must deliver economically if they are to retain the people's consent. What do you think of this article, and what do you think the message that he's emphasizing here about delivery, about the result of good governance?
Exactly. I think this is very, very important article, which was published the same day as the summit was held. And this is really the issue because, I mean, the so-called democracy, as it practiced by the United States, Britain, NATO countries, it has lost all its substance. Because what is the use of a government which does not promote the well-being of the people? I mean, even in the U.S. Constitution, it says the purpose of government is to promote the general welfare of the people, all the people of the country. In the past 50 years, United States governments have promoted the benefit of the 1% top people of the United States and neglected the rest. The same thing goes to the rest of the world. Nations need to see the results of governance in terms of improving their living standards. Now, the only place, not only place, but one of the best places this has taken place is in China. Now, one day before President of Zambia participated in the summit, he inaugurated one of the units of the Kafue Dam in Zambia, which was built by China, which is a very interesting contrast because that dam increased the output of electricity in Zambia by 25%. Now, this is the kind of thing which government have to deliver, and he was completely correct. Now, the so-called democracy, which the United States, or what we call Anglo-American democracy, is actually carried out under the wings of B-52 bombers on Predator drones and depleted uranium-clad shells, and with harsh sanctions against other nations. So this is the reality of the world, and that's one very important reason that more and more nations, since the last Democracy Summit, are moving to the new paradigm of international relations and governance, which is more and more towards China's Belt and Road Initiative, the BRICS countries, and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, because they see that this what delivers to the peoples of their nations the goods they are expected to deliver. And also because people have realized, especially in the last year, that in the West, that the inmates, the lunatics, have taken over the asylum.
Yeah. Okay.
And this is a very scary reality, which is led by the United States, the British, and NATO right now. And that's why nations are moving towards a new understanding of what this governance is about. It's not completely new. As I said earlier, The U.S. Constitution says, the purpose of government is to promote the general welfare of
Right.
the people.
All right.
And this also applies to internationally.
We have to leave it there. Many thanks to Hussein Askary and Margaret Kimberley for sharing with us your insights. When we come back after a short break, we'll talk about the agreement between China and Brazil to use local currencies in large-scale trading between the two countries. What's about it? Stay tuned.